Panic. How many of you in this room are dealing with panic attacks? Put a 1 in the chat box. Curious how many people are here. Maybe all of you are here because it's about panic. Lots and lots of 1s. Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I know that journey very well myself. And I am filled with compassion for those of you that are in the middle of it and are struggling with it. I had my very first panic attack when I was 20 years old. I remember it clear as day. I was in college, sitting in a college classroom, and never had experienced anxiety or panic before in my life. And all of a sudden, the room started seeming like it was shaking and spinning. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was sweating. Thought I was having some weird brain something, seizure, stroke, something. Literally stumbled out of the class and got outside under the trees, and slowly all those sensations went away. And I was like, what the hell was that? I had no idea. And that was the beginning of a very long history, over 20 years, of what ended up being severe panic and anxiety disorder. Interestingly, this episode happened 1 week after my grandfather had passed away unexpectedly. And I was raised mostly by my grandma and grandpa. So he was like a father figure for me. And so there is a little correlation. I had a huge emotional event, had to go right back to school and sit in a class and take notes. But my brain and my body clearly weren't done processing something. And I share that with you because that is such a key understanding of panic and anxiety, is that there is usually a bucket load of emotion that we aren't able to process, and it ends up coming out in other ways. So that's important to know. Unfortunately, that cycle can get stuck and it can go for years and years on end. I personally know what it's like to have it continue and end up on all sorts of medications. I tried many of them, lots of therapies and things like that over the years. And ultimately, I just was struggling. I struggled with it for a long time, and I'll share with you. And I've shared with you on the platform a little bit of what's helped me. But I will say that of all the things that we can deal with, panic attacks really suck. Panic attacks and insomnia, they both really suck. So, I just want you to just hold yourself with that realization and that honesty. Yeah, this holding space for this way that my nervous system is discharging stress or trying to get my attention or trying to cope is difficult. We have a lot of tools on the platform, and they are there to help you, strengthen your pathways to your prefrontal awareness, to strengthen your vagal toning. They're ultimately all indirectly affecting your capacity to handle a panic attack. And many of you are here probably what's the thing that's going to stop it? Because that was the title of the class, right? How to stop a panic attack. And I know I was grasping from anyone that I could. How do I stop this? I hate this. I don't want to deal with this. Well, like I said, I don't know what Laura's magic secret was, so you're going to have to wait on that. But I am going to share with you how I eventually stopped my panic attacks, and how when anxiety comes, or even when panic comes, how I handle it, because you're not ever going to be immune from anxiety and panic. We live in a human body. We have things that happen, but it's how we handle it that is the freedom that ultimately you are all after. It seems like I want to stop this and control this, that's the freedom, but actually it's the handling it so that you can get out of that panic attack cycle. And it's absolutely possible. And it's absolutely possible to get off all the medicines as well. And I'm a testament to that. So hopefully you guys are okay with me subbing today with that little spiel. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see panic attacks and anxiety and the principles that I live by as far as dealing with it, and things that I did along the way when I was having panic. And then we'll open it up for some discussion or for questions, or even working with one of you if one of you are actually having a panic attack right now. I also need to have a little disclaimer. I forgot to say this at the beginning. So the idea of panic attack and anxiety, technically they belong in the realm of mental health practitioners, which I am not one. I'm not a licensed counselor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. So anything I say is not a treatment. It's not prescriptive. I'm not diagnosing anything. I'm just sharing with you my personal journey and my own lifestyle experience. So I just need to make that clear. I'm not representing myself as an authority. And if you do have true panic attacks and issues, it is important that you are working with a qualified and licensed provider as well. So got to say that. So panic and anxiety, I want to share with you, I just jotted down a few notes. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for class, so I don't have a fancy slide, but I'm going to share with you some thoughts about how I think working with it is important for you to be focusing on. Let me see here. Okay. So when I think about panic attacks, if I were to tell you how I got out of it, how I got out of that vicious cycle that truly was 20 years, good solid 20 years of panic disorder, I would say that I learned to embrace panic, and I learned how to disengage from my mind and my mental worry that was a constant chronic cycle. So we actually have to embrace the panic and anxiety. And it's not just about tolerating it, because if you're just trying to buckle down and deal with it, it will continue to run your life. And that's a really hard way to live when we're just trying to grit and bear it. And I know that because I did that for years and was always hoping that another medication would maybe help me, or another hypnosis technique or whatever. So I want to first of all help you to know that there is a process that each of you who are dealing with this has to go through, which is acclimatization. I can't speak today. It's getting yourself used to the feelings and the sensations that your mind thinks are dangerous, that your mind has thoughts about what it means. It's about understanding that panic and anxiety really is like a wounded inner part of us that couldn't handle feelings at one time. And so they create this alarm, these sensations that are the panic and anxiety. And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. You can't handle one feeling at a time, but then you create panic and anxiety. I don't want to handle that either. But that's just how the psyche works. And we need to acclimatize ourselves to that, meaning getting used to those sensations that come up. So we're going to be learning to stay with it, much like you'd stay with a scared child, even though we don't like how it feels. And again, learning to acclimate to these sensations. And that really comes from a lot of what Bessel van der Kolk talks about in the book, The Body Keeps the Score. So before I get into the second piece here, I want you to get this visual in your head. When you're getting anxiety and panic, it is literally like a 2 or 3-year-old is running in the room saying, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. I don't like this. This is overwhelming. And it's like screaming. And imagine you as the parent, if you were to look at that child and you're like, stop it, get away from me, stop it. What is that child going to do? Is it going to calm down, or is it going to escalate? It's going to escalate. When it comes to panic and panic attacks, there's 2 parts to it. There's the wounded part of us, or that child running into the room, screaming and having all sorts of sensations. And the second part is the adult in the room having a reaction to the child. It's super important that you see this as two reactions, because this is your way through this. We can't always control that child running in the room and what they say and the alarm, the wounding, the sensations it brings, okay? And right now, a lot of you who are stuck in panic and anxiety, you're actually more identified with the child and in the perspective of the sky is falling, things aren't okay, my body can't handle this, et cetera, versus the adult in the room that could have a different response to that panic. Sometimes we step into that adult and it is like, well, it's not really an adult, it's more of a protective adult saying, get away from me, get away from me. I need to distract, or taking something to numb it, or, just dissociating, whatever it is. And that doesn't actually help that child in you or that anxiety response to settle long term. So we're going to have to both learn how to be with the screaming child or the initial panic, as well as develop a strategy to attune to the panic child as the adult. Does that make sense? There's two pieces to this. I went for years and years as the child, running from doctor to doctor and thing to thing that says, control it, fix this, fix this, fix this. I never turned to me and asked an adult inside of me to help me handle it and see it differently. Or maybe I tried to for a minute or two, but then I gave up and went back to something outside of me. Please fix this. This is why benzos can be so addictive for those of you on this path, especially if you have trauma. It's like a quick, like, something fixed this for me. And then there becomes a whole other loop with that, which I've been down that rabbit hole. And sometimes, and I'm going to say this about the medication route, sometimes it's absolutely necessary because of where you're at in the journey. So I'm not going to demonize that path. Many of you are dealing with that. Many of you have been able to live a more functional life because of it. And that was me for 20 years. So I'm not going to demonize it. All right. I want you to know that I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying that there is eventually a path where we learn to not run to be rescued by a substance, and we learn how to hold and work through the panic and that somatic response and eventually change how it is in the system. Okay, so let's go back to my very fancy slide here. So we talked about getting used to the sensations when the child comes running in the room. But the second piece that we need to talk about is breaking this, what I would call a dissociation cycle, which is actually where the mind starts trying to figure it out. It's actually a way of dissociating from the panic symptoms. It doesn't feel like it because you're feeling the symptoms and the mind is like grasping and trying to figure it out, or the mind is like, oh my gosh, that's a new sensation. I don't know what that means. It could be this, it could be that. That mind stepping in to try to help you to cope with a sensation, that's an old protective strategy. It's compulsive and it causes you to go into your head and worry. Why? Because worry gives you a sense of control temporarily, actually. It literally gives you a sense of control. When you think of future scenarios that might happen, you, for a very small instant, actually feel more control. And you start getting addicted to these little like micro moments of control through worst case scenario often, and sometimes like not worst case scenario, but when the mind is coming in, it's trying to give you a sense of control. But it is a dissociation cycle. It's compulsive. And it's not the way that you'll ever actually break this panic attack cycle. So these are things to really understand. So I encourage you to notice when you're having panic symptoms or anxiety symptoms, how much you end up going into that old strategy. And what would happen if you interrupted it and said, you know what? I'm not going to have allegiance with this mental worry right now. I'm not going to try to figure it out. Sorry, there's a spelling error there. I'm going to learn how to be comfortable with this unknown and even be able to stay with these anxious feelings. And not that the feelings become comfortable, but you become comfortable in your capacity to be with that screaming child, panic, whatever, without using your mind as a control strategy. That's really what I ended up having to learn how to do. And I'll talk to you about that more in a moment. Please know that when you decide to start being with the sensations and not trying to dissociate, control them, fix them, etc., your ego will freak out because you're not going into the compulsion of let's worry about it, let's fix it, let's figure out this tool, let's grasp for this, grasp for that, but instead you're choosing to be with the panic. The mind and the ego is going to try to pull you back into relationship with worrying and fixing it. And this is where I was saying at the beginning, there's a first reaction and a second reaction. The first reaction is that initial surge of panic, anxiety sensations. And the second reaction is how you handle it. The second reaction often causes the first reaction to escalate if the mind comes in and tries to control it or tries to get it to go away. You might get a temporary hit of control, but then the first reaction will often escalate even more because you didn't ever actually attend to the need of what's behind the panic. So get this kind of clear as we continue to talk, that you need to get used to the feelings. You need to break the dissociation and worry cycle, and there needs to be a willingness to master the second reaction. To master the second reaction. And that's what we do in Primal Trust. We cannot control the first reaction initially. Maybe we don't ever control it. That's your body's somatic alarm system coming up. It's unconscious. You don't get to control that. But you can develop neural pathways to react differently. So, so far, you haven't been told a secret to control it. I know, and that's hard, right? We want to control it. I will tell you that the way that I started to move through this was when I realized that all of my control strategies weren't working long-term. They would work short-term, like maybe for a little while. I'd learn a new tool and technique in a few days, a week, a month, maybe. They seem to be working. And then first reaction would escalate a little more. And I was like, shoot. And then more panic would set in because I couldn't control it. And that cycle just continued over many years. And so I really got to a point where I decided to start using my tools to practice just engaging healthy pathways during the day, whether or not I had a panic or anxiety response. So that would be like brain retraining, vagus nerve toning, all the things. So you're using your tools as like strengthening muscles inside of you so that you can have a better second reaction. Okay. It's not always going to prevent a first reaction. It might over time cause the first reaction to be less and less as you reroute your limbic system and you get your vagal tone vagal tone more optimized. But ultimately, these tools are to help strengthen your capacity to handle it, to handle the panic. So I started really focusing on, the brain retraining, the breathing and all of that. But more so, I made this very conscious choice that in a panic attack, I wasn't going to try to control it anymore. I was going to be with it. And I remember some rough moments of doing that, of feeling the sensations and getting myself used to that the acclimating to the sensations while choosing to not run away from them, choosing to hear the alarm inside of me. And in that, over time, some part of me started to trust that I could handle the sensations, like really handle them. And they got less and less. But it took a while. It was almost like they got a little worse, and then they started getting better. And I would do things that would help me handle them. So for me, I remember I was doing this in the summer. So I would go to the river with my kids a lot and just literally sit in the river in terrifying panic and feel the sensations of the water on me while I was having panic. And I started to commit to doing things with my kids instead of waiting for my panic disorder to pass or afraid that I would have to pull over on the side of the road because I wouldn't be able to drive. I said, you know what? I'm getting out of the house every day. I'm going to take them to the park. I'm going to take them to the river. I'm going to do these things and I'm going to handle it. So I started really committing to that process. I find that getting out in nature is one of the best ways to help diffuse the energy of panic. So I highly recommend that if you decide to really go into this process of, I'm going to be with the feelings, I'm going to be with these sensations, spending as much time in nature as possible. But it's this willingness of like, I am not going to avoid this anymore. I'm not going to try to fix it, resolve it, worry about it, whatever. I'm going to literally sit with this screaming child as long as it takes. As long as it takes. Now, you might need breaks where you, go do brain retraining, go do something fun, and every so often you might need little buffers, but there's an overall process of, I'm going to get used to these sensations, because ultimately, when you know that you can be with the panic sensations, whatever they are, then you start becoming free, because some part of you in your deep inner psyche knows that now you can handle it, because a part of the panic cycle is the fear that you can't handle it, the fear about the second reaction. And as that second reaction turns towards the panic, that cycle of I'm afraid I can't handle it starts to get broken. And then there's a shift. There's a real shift where I noticed that my first reaction got way less, because my second reaction got stronger and more aligned. And then there was like this changing of the guards in my psyche. And what do I mean by that? In panic, when you're having a panic attack, typically the amygdala, your limbic system, is completely overrun with an unconscious part of you that is scared, a young child part of you, or a part of you that had a trauma in the past. That's the part of your psyche that's most dominant at the time. Your prefrontal rational self of I'm okay, there's no threat, there's no tiger right here, is somewhat offline. When you start getting stronger in that second reaction, even though you don't like it, that second reaction can kind of come in and take over the awareness at the time of the panic attack, almost like your limbic system is now more partnered with your conscious adult self versus that scared child. And when that starts to shift, that's when you notice that the panic, anxiety, disorder, whatever you want to call it, starts to diffuse. So ultimately, I'm suggesting that you do as many things as you can to grow that part of you by doing things you love, getting in nature, rewiring your brain, all those things that's going to strengthen the second response. But even more, it's that deep commitment that eventually you're going to come in and meet the first response. And the only way through is through. The only way through is through. We have a lot of other things that are on our platform to help you with this. Simona has a befriending fear series that's really good. We have, there's other support here while you guys wait for Laura's class. But I'm going to pause there. Those are some of my thoughts. Oh, one more thought. The other thing that I did is sometimes I would match the energy of panic. So if I'm having the feeling of I'm out of control, I would put on music and I would become uncontrolled. Think about this. I'm out of control. I'm uncontrolled. And I would move my body in an uncontrolled, unbridled, expressive way. And I just let the music, I let my body just go. And I made that shift inside of my psyche. I am uncontrolled. And I would, do that in nature if I could. It was powerful because now I'm meeting that energy and I'm using it to express myself in a different way. And sometimes that would really help to shift the panic inside of me. So